Pork has been one of the most common and culturally significant meats consumed in the United States, and particularly within North Carolina. It has been a cornerstone of the southeastern meat eaters' diet for as long as people have lived there. The industry has grown massively within a relatively short period of time, and the industry today looks and performs very differently than it used to even just 50 years ago. Today, the hog farming industry is responsible for a considerable amount of pollution in the form of material waste, harmful gases, chemicals, and many more detrimental effects. Historically, hogs have vastly populated the southeast and been a notable presence in the landscape among the wildlife. They were so numerous, in fact, that from the colonial era to the early 20th century, the animals routinely and vastly outnumbered people throughout the South. Being so common, they made for a consistent source of meat for locals during the colonial period and onward. Both the settlers of the Carolinas and the native population heavily relied on pork within their diets. Pork farming was done by many inhabitants of North Carolina and was and still is an important part of their diet and culture. Hog farming and raising used to look very different from the factory farming methods used commonly today. Hogs were pasture-fed and raised in small numbers, often butchered for personal consumption or sold for additional income. Their waste was limited, and it was used as a fertilizer for crops. Hog raising is entwined in Southern culture and agriculture and played an important role in many people's lives. It was much more of a supplemental activity, typically complementing tobacco, cotton production, or mixed and part-time farming in various regions of North Carolina. The industrialization of the hog industry began in the 1970s with the introduction of various factory farming methods. This process started with the use of CAFOs, also known as concentrated animal feeding operations. These are large structures that house hundreds to even thousands of livestock that are crowded into small spaces. The animals live and grow within these crowded facilities under poor living conditions. The scale of the operations exploded, and the ownership structure of farms has drastically been altered. Most hogs are now produced by operators who work under contract to corporate integrators, which provide the management plan and own the animals, feed, and transportation, while the operators own the land, buildings, and waste. These larger-scale, feudal-esque methods have caused the hog population and production levels to explode in scale, along with the pollution that comes with it. With these huge hog population growths comes the shrinking number of farmers raising hogs. For example, in 1982, nearly 330,000 farms produced swine. Over the next 10 years, this number of farmers declined by 42%, while the number of hogs sold grew by 17%. This growth has sent North Carolina from 6th to 2nd in terms of U.S. swine production, surpassing poultry and tobacco as state commodities. All of this immense growth and production has to come at the cost of something, and our environment has paid the price. Most of the pollution is a product of waste and the various methods used to dispose of it. North Carolina is a significant producer of hog waste relative to the rest of the country, with 20 million tons of hog waste produced each year in the state out of over 116 million tons nationally. This makes the state responsible for almost 1/6 of the national total. The waste is collected in large cesspools for anaerobic decomposition and is also often sprayed over fields as a form of fertilizer. This seemingly simple method can lead to multiple different forms of environmental harm that affects the humans, animals, and plant life of an area. Firstly, you have air pollution caused by the evaporation of large amounts of ammonia gas and hydrogen sulfide into the atmosphere that creates air quality and pollution problems, along with the emission of dust and particles containing biological contaminants. This makes it dangerous to live within the proximity of CAFOs and leaves you vulnerable to even the air that you could breathe. These air emissions are due to the large waste lagoons. Even outside of the lagoons, the spray fields are often oversaturated, leading to runoff into the surface water. At many sites, hog waste has been illegally discharged into nearby water bodies through direct piping from lagoons and from field runoff, causing algal blooms, fish kills, and dying aquatic vegetation. Many of these water bodies drain into larger waterways, such as the Cape Fear River and the Pamlico Sound, where larger communities obtain their drinking water. Even heavy rain can cause nutrients from spray fields to spread into nearby water sources or leach into the ground, spreading pollutants everywhere. There are multiple examples of large-scale polluting events caused by CAFO-related disasters. For example, during the summer of 1995, there were 7 major spills from waste lagoons in North Carolina, 6 of which were hog-related. As a result of these spills, more than 30 million gallons of hog waste poured into the waterways, resulting in massive fish kills. These CAFO operations can cause significant harm to their surroundings, and many of the people who experience this harm experience environmental racism. Environmental racism is defined as a type of inequality where people in communities of color and other low-income communities face a disproportionate risk of exposure to pollution and health-related conditions. One must look at where the majority of CAFOs and waste disposal areas are operated and their demographics to understand who is harmed. According to an analysis of hog production in North Carolina, these facilities are located disproportionately in communities with higher levels of poverty, higher proportions of non-white persons, and higher dependence on wells for household water. The development of this industry in areas of people who have been historically oppressed and denied social mobility exposes them to adverse health effects that they often have very few ways to deal with. People impacted by CAFOs experience it in many ways. Locals may need to rely on the farms for work, becoming exposed to the multiple harmful fumes and chemicals used in the factory farming and waste treatment process. Their surrounding environment and wildlife are at a significant risk due to the risk of pollution in the form of runoff, leaching, and air pollution. For example, a study done about the effects of living near swine CAFOs found that symptoms including headaches, runny nose, sore throat, excessive coughing, diarrhea, and burning eyes were reported more frequently by residents of the hog neighboring community compared to residents of the other two communities. They also found that over half of the respondents living near the hog operation reported being unable to go outside or even open windows on pleasant days. The harmful effects do not end here. Socioeconomic devaluations from the siting of hog operations in rural communities can include the displacement of small, independent farmers, lowered property values, the disruption of recreational and tourist industries, and the impeding of future community development. This means that the hog industry not only harms the environment, but disproportionately harms people of color and people of low socioeconomic status and their access to social mobility and potential for community development. This inequality can be proved by looking at census data of where people live, the demographics of who lives there, and the concentration of hog operations near them. The following map shows the areas and locations of intensive hog operations as of 1998. Much of the concentration is in the eastern part of the state. This concentration corresponds with the regions that often contain the highest population of non-white individuals, especially to the northeast and southeast part of the state. Along with this, the locations of hog operations also correspond with areas more densely populated by people in poverty, as shown by the following map. These maps show how hog operations are disproportionately located near minorities and people of low socioeconomic status, meaning that they are disproportionately more likely to experience the adverse effects that come with living near CAFOs. Finally, we can see that these populations are also often less dense and more rurally located according to the following map as well. All of these factors have significant implications. Many of these individuals lack the resources of social mobility that would allow them to escape these kinds of challenging conditions. This also means that these groups are more susceptible to the health risks associated with CAFOs, since many of them are located rurally and are more likely to rely on the environment or resources from their surrounding environment, like wells for water or farming for food. All of this information about how the swine industry and factory farms harm the environment begs the question, what can be done about it? Most significantly, CAFOs probably are not going away. Our society's high rate of consumption of meat has solidified the need for our massive production levels. It is also very profitable, the key driver behind the entire industry. This means that finding ways of properly and safely dealing with waste is arguably the most important way of reducing harm to people in the environment. People living near CAFOs are more likely to experience adverse effects, but it is not guaranteed that they will be harmed. From the standpoint of environmental justice, regulating and restricting these CAFOs is very important. Everyone has the right to live within a healthy environment, and our pursuit of industry detrimentally impacts humanity's health and safety for the future. This is where we must analyze this situation with the concept known as the precautionary principle, or the idea that official action be taken to protect people and environments in cases where there is scientific uncertainty as to the nature of the potential damage or the likelihood of risk. Even though harm may not be completely guaranteed to happen, the locals deserve protection based on the fact that there is a significant potential for harm. Federal regulations can help with this, and were not explicitly created for CAFOs until relatively recently. For example, the Federal Clean Water Act created the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System program that regulated CAFOs as a point source polluter as a revision in February 2003. For a long time before the NPDES, CAFO operations were not considered as a point source of pollution, which meant that they were not regulated as harshly at all. There are also other methods that can be employed by hog farms themselves to hopefully counter various forms of pollution. For example, hog farmers in New Zealand, another country where the industry is significant, use various vegetation and planting methods to combat pollution. Small, dense hedges can prevent odor problems on windless days, and tall poplar trees like the Lombardy poplar can combat the odor on windy days. Of course, this method will not necessarily work for all farms of all kinds for all forms of pollution, but implementing them can significantly improve the quality of life for local inhabitants and wildlife. The development of factory farming methods for swine and the changes brought with them have rippled throughout North Carolina as the industry changed from small-scale subsistence farming into massive company-owned farms operated by local workers. The harmful effects brought with these CAFO operations are disproportionately experienced by people of color and people of low socioeconomic status. These individuals are also more likely to work in these industries, meaning that they make the companies more money while experiencing the negative effects. Tighter rules and regulations are integral to protecting rural North Carolinians from the pollution caused by CAFOs.